Tonight, a former Watergate prosecutor joins us to look at the impeachment stalemate and where we go from here. Also, a former Republican congressman joins us to talk impeachment, the state of his party, and whether or not bipartisanship is dead. And then we'll check in on the presidential race, who's up, who's down, who's got the momentum as we get closer to the Iowa caucuses. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman, in tonight for Richard French, and we begin this evening with the latest on impeachment and whether or not any side is making progress as they try to set the terms of the Senate trial.
Thank you.
President Trump still on holiday in Florida, but still fuming over impeachment, firing off a new string of attacks against Democrats this morning, blasting House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, slamming her California district, and criticizing her for threatening to delay his Senate trial by withholding articles of impeachment from the Senate.
She hates the Republican Party. She hates all of the people that voted for me and the Republican Party.
Pelosi is refusing to take the next steps in the impeachment process, explaining in a letter to her colleagues, quote, "It now remains for the Senate to present the rules under which we will proceed." Democrats are pushing to have new witness testimony and documents as part of the president's trial, but Republicans already indicated they're likely to reject those requests. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell telling Fox News he'll work hand in hand with the president.
But we'll be working through this process, hopefully in a fairly short period of time, in total coordination with the White House counsel's office.
A member of McConnell's own party now blasting those comments. Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski, a moderate Republican, expressing her concerns on KTUU TV.
When I heard that, I was disturbed. To me, it means that we have to take that step back from being hand in glove with the defense.
The statement making Murkowski the first Republican to publicly voice those concerns. And that leads to our first guest tonight, who is one of 17 Watergate prosecutors who recently penned a piece in the Washington Post saying Trump should be impeached. Richard Davis joins us now. He's also a former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. Richard, let's begin with where we find impeachment right now. Speaker Pelosi has yet to transmit the articles to the Senate. The president and Republicans are crying foul, claiming that's unfair or illegal or unconstitutional. I know this is basic, but let's just reset. Has the president been impeached? Is Pelosi's delay move legal? And other than delaying the start time, does her move have any impact on impeachment whatsoever?
Well, I don't know that it'll have a major impact. I mean, it will delay the start time, and I think it's an attempt to create some leverage. But ultimately, I think the Senate's going to have to work this out amongst themselves, and the pressure maybe come from senators on Senator McConnell, maybe more significant, frankly, than anything the Speaker may do.
But the president is impeached. There is no altering that fact, and the fact that Speaker Pelosi hasn't transmitted the articles doesn't change anything about it?
It doesn't really change anything. I mean, I think we're in a little bit of a gamesmanship on both sides here, each side trying to get some leverage in terms of negotiations over the trial. These articles will be transmitted at some point. There will be a trial, and the issue is, what is the nature of that trial?
As you hinted, we are seeing some minor breaks in the Republican opposition here. Lisa Murkowski, senator from Alaska, was critical of Mitch McConnell both for working with the White House and not seeming as an impartial juror, though it's not clear if that's a legitimate ethical concern from Murkowski or just that the optics of this all look bad. But there certainly is a fear that the GOP might be seen as a rubber stamp for President Trump. Why haven't we, in your mind, seen more pushback from Republican senators? And if there is any, would that be in private?
Well, there might be some in private, but I mean, I think it's one of the sad facts that we've seen so little pushback from the Republicans, office holders in Washington on really anything. But the notion that they're resisting really some pretty plain need for certain witnesses who the House was denied an opportunity to question is even more unfortunate. But as you say, I think that you're beginning to see some pushback in terms of this, against this notion that it's all right for the majority leader to coordinate strategy with the White House.
There are a couple of possibilities that could break the logjam. I want to float a couple of them past you and get your take on them. The first is sort of a traditional, what we've seen in the Senate in years past, a gang of senators. In this case, you can identify 10 or 11 senators, 3 Democrats, 7 or 8 Republicans, who could steer the process any way they wanted to. Republicans only have 53 votes. They could set the limits and say, yes, we want witnesses, or we want the trial to go like this. They have the balance of the majority. Why don't you think that's formed? Would that be effective if it did?
Well, I think it would be effective because there are certain Democrats who I think are, one of them, Doug Jones, is up for re-election, Joe Manchin in West Virginia, maybe a few others, who want to show their independence. And there are certain Republicans who want to show their independence. Lisa Murkowski has already done that, and there's some of the vulnerable Republicans up in 2020, Susan Collins, Cory Gardner, and a few others. And one way that each side may show their independence is by forming the kind of group you suggested. But I would suggest that it would be more likely that they will focus on the process than on the issue of guilt or innocence. In other words, this group might come together to force a compromise on witnesses and process. That doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be aligned in terms of how they vote in terms of ultimate conviction.
The other possibility, Richard, that I've heard is something of a witness trade, if you will. Republicans want Joe Biden and Adam Schiff to testify. They also want the whistleblower, but that's not going to happen. Democrats want Mulvaney and Bolton and others. Why not a trade? Is it too risky for Democrats? I mean, it could be a bright, shining moment for Joe Biden.
Well, I mean, I think it could be. I think if he's actually the witness, I would find it hard to believe that even the Republican senators are going to be aggressive or questioners. I don't know who would be the questioner. And I think in any event, I don't think Adam Schiff will be a witness. But if there is a trade, I think it likely will result not necessarily in live testimony at the trial itself, but as in the Clinton impeachment, depositions of certain of these witnesses. And then each side can play portions of those depositions because they'll be videotaped at the trial itself. I think that's more likely than that we're going to see in the well of the Senate, the actual people testifying.
We've heard a lot of arguments from Democrats about the case for bringing new witnesses into a Senate trial. It seems somewhat obvious. I'm curious if you've heard other arguments supporting that other than the ones that we've commonly heard. I also want you to put on the other hat, if you will, and give us the argument against calling new witnesses in a Senate trial. Do those arguments amount to anything more than, well, it could be bad for the president?
Well, I think the arguments, I suppose, are, and we've heard them, is that, well, the House made its case. This is what they based the impeachment on, and this is what the trial should be based on. I don't find that particularly persuasive, particularly because the witnesses that the Democrats are talking about are people that the Democrats in the House wanted to call. They wanted John Bolton. They wanted Mick Mulvaney. They wanted the OMB official. They wanted these people to testify, and the only reason they didn't testify is because the president directed them not to. So in these particular circumstances, I think it's more than appropriate that they are called as witnesses, and I don't think it's, a very strong argument to say, well, the House didn't rely on them, so the Senate can't. The House is the charging body, the Senate is the trying body, and if you do the parallel with the criminal justice system, the fact that there wasn't a witness didn't appear in front of the grand jury that indicted somebody doesn't mean that that new witness couldn't be called to trial and shouldn't be called to trial if they have relevant information.
Finally, Richard, it's been a long time since we saw the last impeachment trial for a president, 21 years. What lessons can we learn about how the parties make the rules, the role of the Chief Justice, how open-minded senators were then versus now, or anything else that you think might shed some light on what we're eventually going to see play out in the Senate?
Well, it might be useful to have, I suppose, some what I'll call permanent rules that would apply. I'm not sure that anything when you get to presidential impeachment as opposed to impeachment of a judge would ever be considered permanent because they'll always be subject to change. And in an effort to try and say it shouldn't be the rules of a particular moment, but these are the permanent rules as to witnesses, these, not just, more basic principles of process, and try and accommodate a set of standards that aren't being developed in the context of an impeachment. But I think we have to remember that impeachment is by design a political process, meaning it's giving to Congress the political ability to say that there's a level of proof that warrants the removal of a president. There is always going to be a political element to that, and I think we can't get away from that. And what we just need to try and get as much information as possible out to the American public, and this is why it's important to have witnesses, so that at the end of the day, whatever the result, people will feel that that all the relevant information is laid bare, not just in front of the Senate, but in front of the American public.
Richard Davis is a former Watergate prosecutor. He's also a former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. Thanks for a few minutes. Enjoy the holidays and Happy New Year, Richard.
All right, thank you. You too.
And up next, more on impeachment. A former Republican congressman from a swing district in New Jersey joins us as he talks impeachment, the state of politics in Washington, and more.